Welcome to the club! Hello everyone! Today we continue discussing Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and today we discuss chapters from 18 till 33. As usual, let's start with the summary. And today I'm going to start. At the ball, Elizabeth is upset that Wickham isn't there and thinks Darcy is to blame. But she's surprised when Darcy asks her to dance. During their dance, they talk about Wickham and end their dance feeling angry and dissatisfied. At dinner, Elizabeth is embarrassed by her mom talking loudly about Jane and Bingley getting engaged. Darcy overhears and Elizabeth tries to change the subject. Mr. Collins adds to her misery by continuing to hover near her, causing Elizabeth to be grateful when Charlotte engages him in conversation. The next day, Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth, but she politely refuses. Her mom wants her to accept, but her dad says he would disown her if she did. Mr. Collins realizes he has no chance and takes back his proposal. Charlotte Lucas visits the Bennets and learns of Elizabeth's refusal of Mr. Collins. After Mr. Collins withdraws his offer, Charlotte begins spending more time with him, and within a few days he proposes to her. Charlotte Lucas accepts Mr. Collins' proposal for security, not love. Jane learns that Bingley and his friends won't return to Netherfield, upsetting her and angering Elizabeth. Elizabeth is suspicious of Darcy and Bingley's sisters for keeping them apart from Jane. Jane gets another letter confirming they won't come back, making Elizabeth blame them for Jane's unhappiness. Wickham's visits help lift Elizabeth's spirit. Mrs. Bennet's brother and sister-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, visit for Christmas. Jane and Elizabeth like them a lot. Mrs. Gardiner cautions Elizabeth against encouraging Wickham, telling her that the lack of fortune on either side makes the hope of a match between the two of them impractical and irresponsible. Jane goes to London with the Gardiners. There, she hopes to meet Caroline Bingley, but a chilly reception from Miss Bingley makes Jane realize that Elizabeth was correct in her assessment of Bingley's sister as being a false friend to Jane.
Collins and Charlotte get married. Elizabeth says Miss Gardiner that Wickham has found another woman with money. As March arrives, Elizabeth prepares to visit Charlotte with Sir William and Maria, one of Charlotte's sisters. On their way, they visit Jane and Mrs. Gardiner. Jane is quite healthy, but Mrs. Gardiner says that she is often quite upset by the Bingleys and no longer speaks to Miss Bingley at all. Elizabeth and the Lucases visit Collins and Charlotte. Lady de Bourgh invites them all to join her for dinner the next day. Lady de Bourgh is surprised to learn that Elizabeth grew up with no governess in a house with 5 daughters and is shocked by Elizabeth's calm response to her questions. She considers that Bennet girls to have been poorly raised with no proper guidance, training and poor manners in conversation. Darcy arrives with his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam. Elizabeth and Fitzwilliam get along during this visit. Darcy shows no interest for Miss de Bourgh, his intended future wife. The next day, Elizabeth receives a visit from Darcy. Elizabeth asks him whether Mr. Bingley will ever return to Netherfield. Darcy thinks it is unlikely. Elizabeth doesn't understand why Darcy keeps coming. One day she comes across Fitzwilliam while walking, and she learns that Bingley is in Darcy's debt for his helping to get him out of an unwanted marriage. Elizabeth assumes this to mean the marriage to Jane. She is very upset and angry.
So, the main question: why is Darcy keeps coming to Elizabeth?
We all know that.
No one knows. What a surprise! Yeah. But still,
Elizabeth doesn't know it.
It's very funny, don't you think, that she can't guess? Mm-hmm. Because she is described as the person who sees what's happening, what's going on, and what kind of people surround her. But in this exact case, I think the problem is that we still remember she is blinded by her being hurt by him from the first meeting, and that she is prejudiced against him. She doesn't want to give him chances. She doesn't want to see that maybe it was an incident, so to speak, during their first meeting, and she continues to be prejudiced. Okay, so overall impressions of this part, what do you think?
Well, I think that actually this part is going to be one of the least interesting, just because not so many events happen, and we know the beginning of the story, and I remember the next parts that are going to be much more interesting, at least for me. That's why it is okay, so I still liked it, but nothing special. We learn some new details about the characters, we learn some new characters, and yes, that's it. So that's just my impression.
Yes, I agree with you, and I also would like to add that I think in most novels, stories, there are such parts where it seems that nothing happens, but they are needed there to add some characters, to deepen the storyline, and so on. Yes, and let's start with the main, I think, event here is that Bingley and Darcy, they leave Netherfield. What do you think about it, and why did they do it? Because in previous part it seemed that everything went well and that Bingley was so fond of Jane and that they were to marry very soon. What happened?
Well, what do you mean? What do I think? It's written in the book. Why they did this thing? Like, it was just Darcy's idea because he didn't want his friend to marry Jane. That's why he persuaded him to go away and to find another woman to marry.
What do you think about his doing so?
Well, I think that it's none of his business.
Definitely, but still.
So, yeah, but I think that Mr. Bingley is very trustful and is easily influenced by other people. So that's probably his main problem. And of course, Mr. Darcy has no right to choose for him and to influence his decisions. I mean, Mr. Bingley's decisions. So that's why it characterizes him in a bad way.
Yes, maybe in the situation where many women wanted to marry men with money, maybe Darcy thought that Jane is one of those women trying to get the money. Maybe he wanted to save his friend from being deceived. That's the only thing that I can think of why Darcy's intentions might be good. But still, I completely agree that this is none of his business, and if Mr. Bingley wants to be deceived, he has the right to be deceived. Yes. I have a couple, not too many as previous time, parts that I marked, and maybe we can discuss them. Let's see. Okay, also we need, of course, to discuss the situation with Mr. Collins and his proposal and him getting married with Charlotte instead of Elizabeth, and it happened so quick. The situation, let's discuss the first part. When he proposed, Elizabeth declined, and then he says this: "I am not now to learn," replied Mr. Collins with a formal wave of the hand, "that it is usual with young ladies to reject the addresses of the men whom they secretly mean to accept when he first applies for their favor, and that sometimes the refusal is repeated a second or even a third time. I am therefore by no means discouraged by what you have just said, and shall hope to lead you to the altar ere long." When I was reading it, again, I remembered how we discussed the situation that Charlotte last time said that men should be encouraged and women should show more affection than they feel. And this time we see that men are sure that if women reject them, it only means that they want to increase their interest in them. And I was like, Sorry, what? And what should a woman say, in fact, so the men believe that they don't want to do something? This is my main question.
So I think it's it doesn't work with all men, but it's just Mr. Collins. And I really love this character. Of course, I would not like to be with such people in real life, but I love the character just because he's so comic.
Yes.
and I always laugh. Yes, so I always laugh when I read something that he says because it is really hilarious and ridiculous sometimes. I really enjoyed the scene when he proposed to her, and he was so self-confident. And it is so nice. I do not love such people in real life, again. Definitely not, because it is not very good. Like it scares me sometimes.
Yes, I agree. On the one hand, our society thinks that when people are persistent in achieving what they want, even though they had several rejections, the society thinks it is something good. But in fact, I think we should all remember how the other part feels. The other part who is being like attacked, we should all think about this part, how unhappy those people are. And I think, yes, we should not really encourage people behave in such way and believe in people when they say that they don't want to do something. Yes. And after that, of course, we remember the situation that he said that I am going to talk to your parents and your parents are going to make you marry me. There is a dialogue between Elizabeth, her mother, and her father. And her father says, "An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day, you must be a stranger to one of your parents. Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do." In fact, I liked this exact phrase, this exact moment, though of course Mr. Bennet indeed does many things that are questionable, to say the least. But this time it was kind of a nice note. And what do you think about it?
Well, I didn't really like it. Of course, it was kind of a joke, and this is just humor, but
Yes.
So it's nothing special to me. And I didn't like his attitude to the next part of news that they received, like about Charlotte and Collins, because he said that for it gratified him, he said, to discover that Charlotte Lucas, whom he had been used to think tolerably sensible, was as foolish as his wife and more foolish than his daughter. And again, I do not love reaction of Elizabeth in this case when she found out about Charlotte and Collins, because she started saying something like it is a disgrace to marry such men. Charlotte is going to humiliate herself, and like, okay, so maybe you care about your friend, and I can see some sense in it, but it's her choice,
Yes.
so why not? And she justifies her choice. She says about the reasons that she wants to be secure, that she wants to have a man, have a family, and it doesn't really matter to her whether she loves him or not. So just respect her point of view.
I completely agree.
I love Elizabeth generally, but
Yes.
I do not know why she blames her.
Yes.
Okay, if you are worried about her, but some words were strange for me.
In some way, we might think that Charlotte kind of like saved the situation for Elizabeth, and Elizabeth should be thankful for her. But still, I would like also to continue a little bit to talk about Mr. Collins and his reaction to being rejected. Mr. Collins, meanwhile, was meditating in solitude on what had passed. He thought too well of himself to comprehend on what motives his cousin could refuse him, and though his pride was hurt, he suffered in no other way. His regard for her was quite imaginary, and the possibility of her deserving her mother's reproach prevented his feeling any regret. I was also laughing when I read this exact line, that he thought too well of himself to comprehend on what motives his cousin could refuse him. How anyone could refuse such a man as he? And I was like, okay, it is like very strange. And also I was very much surprised how fast the situation changed. Of course, we understand that for Charlotte Lucas, it was a really nice way to organize her life, because maybe it was kind of like the only chance for her to get married and to have a family. And yes, indeed, she is such a person who cares more about the safety, about the comfort of her life than about emotions and love and all that stuff. That is much more important for Elizabeth, for example, yes? And there is this part that I would like also to discuss when Elizabeth discusses with Jane what happened. "Nay," said Elizabeth, "this is not fair. You wish to think all the world respectable and are hurt if I speak ill of anybody. I only want to think you perfect, and you set yourself against it. Do not be afraid of my ruining into any excess, of my encroaching on your privilege of universal goodwill. You need not. There are few people whom I really love, and still fewer of whom I think well. The more I set of the world, the more I am dissatisfied with it, and every day confirms my belief of the inconsistency of all human characters, and of all the little dependence that can be placed on the appearance of merit or sense. I have met with two instances lately. One I will not mention, the other is Charlotte's marriage. It is unaccountable. In every view, it is unaccountable. To some degree, I can agree with Elizabeth that sometimes there are moments in your life when you really think that the more I see of the world, the more I am dissatisfied with it. This is the one thing. And the second that is really true to life is that every day confirms my belief of the inconsistency of all human characters. This is also very true to life, because I am also sure of it, because I have met many examples in my everyday life. That's why I agree. But maybe because it is like a usual thing this day, I'm not that much angry or not that much emotional about it. And sometimes when I communicate with people and their reaction is very different from what I expect of them, I'm like, well, okay, I need to accept that. What can I do about it? Nothing. But still, I also like very much Jane's reply. My dear Lizzie, do not give way to such feelings as these. They will ruin your happiness. You do not make allowance enough for difference of situation and temper. Consider Mr. Collins's respectability and Charlotte's steady, prudent character. Remember that she is one of a large family, that as to fortune, it is a most eligible match, and be ready to believe for everybody's sake that she may feel something like regard and esteem for our cousin. I find Jane to be also very nice character in the way that she tries to think about the other part. She tries to take into consideration other points of life, and that she always tries to remember that there are some facts that we might not know, and that's why we shouldn't judge people and situations too fast.
Okay, so as for this phrase, I particularly like the part about seeing the world and be dissatisfied with it. Yes, I completely agree with it. And as for the situation, I agree with you, and I agree with Jane more, of course, in this particular situation. If we take the whole story, I tend to be on Elizabeth's side. But in this situation, of course, I will choose Jane's point of view. Because she says some things that make sense.
Yes.
And I think that generally she is too gentle. She is too nice for this world.
Absolutely.
And of course, it's not bad. But again, she is too trustful, and she is very similar to Mr. Bingley in that respect.
Yes.
That's why they are a perfect match. But yeah, so I think that for life, it can be dangerous sometimes.
Yes. It can be dangerous, but still also we need to think and remember about the times of this book, when this book was written, and also I agree that it is much more difficult for such tender people and such trustful people to live in our world, because there are indeed many people who try to deceive you. That's why I think they are kind of like vulnerable and easy to be stressed and all that stuff. Though I still wish there could be a little bit more of such people, of such nice people in our world than there are in fact. Okay, let's move to the vocabulary. And the first phrase I have is, in fact, I have mentioned it, but still, let's talk about it once more. So, ere long, it means in a little while, or any minute, or soon. And the sentence is, I am therefore by no means discouraged by what you have just said, and shall hope to lead you to the altar ere long.
Okay, my first phrase, by and by, incidentally or by the way. He smiled and assured her that whatever she wished him to say should be said. Very well. That reply will do for the present. Perhaps by and by I may observe that private balls are much pleasanter than public ones.
Okay, my next one is word, and it's a verb to dawdle, which means to do something or go somewhere very slowly, taking more time than is necessary. Mr. Collins was not left long to the silent contemplation of his successful love, for Mrs. Bennet, having dawdled about in the vestibule to watch for the end of the conference, no sooner saw Elizabeth open the door and with quick step pass her towards the staircase than she entered the breakfast room and congratulated both him and herself in warm terms on the happy prospect of their nearer connection.
Next phrase I have, a man 10 times his consequence. Consequence here has the old-fashioned meaning of importance or standing in the community. When the dancing recommenced, however, and Darcy approached to claim her hand, Charlotte could not help cautioning her in a whisper not to be a simpleton and allow her fancy for Wickham to make her appear unpleasant in the eyes of a man 10 times his consequence.
Okay, my next one is, I think it's a phrasal verb, to take in, but I didn't know this meaning. To take in means to cheat, fool or deceive someone, and the abstract is, Mrs. Bennet was in fact too much overpowered to say a great deal while Sir William remained, but no sooner had he left them than her feelings found a rapid vent. In the first place, she persisted in disbelieving the whole of the matter. Secondly, she was very sure that Mr. Collins had been taken in. Thirdly, she trusted that they would never be happy together. And fourthly, that the match might be broken off.
It's also my next phrase. So,
Sorry.
I will choose the word rectitude. Morally correct behavior or thinking. Her disappointment in Charlotte made her turn with fonder regard to her sister, of whose rectitude and delicacy she was sure her opinion could never be shaken, and for whose happiness she grew daily more anxious, as Bingley had now been gone a week and nothing more was heard of his return.
My next abstract has 3 words that I would like to mention. The first is a phrase, to be crossed in love, which means fall in love without reciprocity, experience unrequited love. The second one is to jilt, which means suddenly reject or abandon a lover. And the last one is creditably, which means well enough to deserve praise or approval. Mr. Bennet treated the matter differently. "So, Lizzie," said he one day, "your sister is crossed in love, I find. I congratulate her. Next to being married, a girl likes to be crossed in a little in love, now and then. It is something to think of, and it gives her a sort of distinction among her companions. When is your turn to come? You will hardly bear to be long outdone by Jane. Now is your time. Here are officers enough in Meryton to disappoint all the young ladies in the country. Let Wickham be your man. He is a pleasant fellow and would jilt you creditably." How can anyone jilt someone creditably? My main question is, and it's like, how can be someone's turn to be crossed in love?
Such a strange man.
Very.
The next word I have is avarice. It is a strong feeling that you want a lot of money and possession. Pray, my dear aunt, what is the difference in matrimonial affairs between the mercenary and the prudent motive? Where does discretion end and avarice begin?
My next phrase is extenuating circumstances. And those are the circumstances that render conduct less serious and thereby serve to reduce the damages to be awarded or the punishment to be imposed. Miss Bennet was the only creature who could suppose there might be any extenuating circumstances in the case, unknown to the society of Hertfordshire. Her mind and steady candor always pleaded for allowances and urged the possibility of mistakes, but by everybody else, Mr. Darcy was condemned as the worst of men. Okay guys, thanks very much for watching this episode. We're going to continue discussing this book next time, so please join in reading it with us. All the contacts are in the description box below. You always can write us in Telegram and VK. We are always glad to talk to you. Thanks for watching and live long and
make allowance enough for difference of situation and temper.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Ну что?
Сейчас идут.
Нет, нет. Еще раз попробуем.
Вип у нас зона. Мы сняли для съемок.
Да. With the... I'm going to start. The first part. Jane and... Сейчас выйдет, подождем.
Okay, все, продолжаем. And Elizabeth says to Miss... Elizabeth and...
Подожди. Остановись. Запомни. Elizabeth and... Продолжаем.
Lady de Burgh.
The Berg.
The Berg. Mr. Хотела сказать Беннет. Mr. Bingley, why do they all have similar names?
Yes.
Ладно, я придумала.
Давай.
Was as foolish. Да блин. Сейчас, давай заново.
Давай. On what has passed. Had passed. Я сейчас еще раз начну. Okay, let's move to the vocabulary now.
Блин, давай еще раз скажу.
Ладно.
Поправлялась.
Хорошо.
Okay, my first phrase. By
What?
the by.
By the by, yes.
Мне кажется, там было как-то по-другому. By and by. Или
А
by
у тебя
the by.
есть кусочек-то?
When the dancing recommenced. When the dancing recommenced, however, the Darcy
Нормально?
Почему у меня and и the сегодня одно слово? When the dancing recommenced. When the dancing recommenced, however, the...
Соберись.
Это еще долго читать.
Тут большие куски всегда, да.
When the dancing recommenced, however...
Not today.
Сейчас.
So Sir William remained. Рemained. Подождите.